Hey everybody, welcome back to the Sanctum. If you couldn't tell from our introduction, this episode we're going to be taking a look at The Mummy. The Mummy has always been the wild card of the classic Universal monsters. He's never really anyone's favorite, yet they made 7 total Mummy pictures overall, and every time they try and resurrect the Universal monster universe, they start with a Mummy movie. Like Brendan Fraser or Tom Cruise, and those never really take off or succeed. Yet, I find the Mummy fascinating. And for vintage monster toys, the Mummy ones are my favorite. I really dig them. Next to Frankenstein, of course. Frankenstein's number one. But the Mummy comes in a close second and really occupies a lot of my collection. So, join us, won't you? As we go from the desert of the Sahara to the streets of Cairo to a college campus in New England and finally to a swamp in Louisiana as we explore the vintage world of the Mummy in a little episode we like to call The Good, the Bad, and the Mummy. First up, we have these 2 cool custom pieces of Boris Karloff from the original 1932 film The Mummy. The first one here is Karloff as the Mummy himself, Imhotep. And you can see it's a really cool sculpt. This is by Type 3 Toys and John Farley. Really captures the Jack Pierce makeup. Really has like Karloff's sallow cheeks there that he had. Great profile. I mean, that looks so much like Karloff. And it's got a few cool custom pieces as well. It's got the wrinkled mummy hand with the scarab ring. Cool bandaging. And he's got the other hand here. And then he's got this little scroll of Thoth Aman that he holds in his hand that he uses to raise his love from the dead. Interesting enough, in the first Mummy, Karloff only appears as the Mummy for about 5 to 10 minutes, the first 5 to 10 minutes of the picture. And it's a really memorable, terrifying scene. It starts out with these archaeologists having found this tomb, and they open up the sarcophagus and find Karloff as Imhotep inside. And the interesting thing they note is they state that his organs are still there. He's still intact. He must have been buried alive, because normal mummification process is to remove the organs and such and prepare the body for mummification. And they can tell that he was mummified alive, which is terrifying in and of itself. Then one of the archaeologists is left alone in the room, and he opens up the scroll of Thoth Aman, and he reads from it aloud, and there's this great shot of Karloff's eyes opening, his hands sort of falling down out of the bandages, and he walks over and just puts his hand down on the scroll, and the archaeologist slowly turns and looks up and sees this mummy come to life staring at him. And he instantly just goes insane. And that's it. That's all that Karloff appears as the Mummy in the picture. And it's very memorable. It's a great film, and it's grown on me more and more over the years. As a kid, I think, to a certain degree, there were long stretches of boredom in it because the Mummy wasn't in it all the time. So I was sort of, Frankenstein was always in the Frankenstein movies. Dracula was in the Dracula films. And the werewolf was always in the werewolf pictures. But the first Mummy, the Mummy is only there for the first 5 to 10 minutes. And then it's Karloff as Ardeth Bey. Ardeth Bay is a really cool character, and Karloff plays the hell out of this role. He's the villain of the piece, but at the same time, he's a very sympathetic character once you find out his backstory. Ultimately, as the priest Imhotep, what he was caught doing was he was in the temple one night trying to resurrect his dead lover, forbidden lover, because she was a princess, the princess Anaxuramen. And for that, he's sentenced to be mummified and buried alive. And when he comes back to life, he runs into a woman that he believes is the reincarnation of his princess, and he decides that he will sacrifice her, mummify her, and resurrect her again so that they can live forever in love. So ultimately what he is doing is for love. It's not a sinister plan to take over the world or anything along those lines. And it's a really cool figure as well, if you take a look at it here. I mean, you can see, look at that. Really nice sculpt of Karloff. It's the black and white silver screen edition. You can see he's got his little fez on there. The tassel hanging off. I mean, look at that hair and look at that profile, that great Karloff profile. Very cool. And it's amazing the way that they kept him, even though he's supposed to be playing sort of this archaeologist type guy or purveyor of ancient artifacts. He's still the mummy in human form. He's the mummy trying to pass himself off as a regular person, which in and of itself is kind of creepy, because the mummy in this one it can speak, it has thought, it has intelligence. It's not just the shambling beast it becomes in the later films. It's funny when you think about it, but the film is really a product of its time. You're dealing with a movie about ancient mummies, but at the time, don't forget, Tutankhamun's tomb had just been discovered in the 20s, and this Egyptian revival had sort of taken place throughout the world, especially in America, with people being sort of obsessed with Egyptian-style architecture and Egyptian-style clothing and jewelry and things like that. A lot of movie theaters and theaters were designed in the style of ancient Egypt, with hieroglyphics on the wall and paintings and columns and things like that. So they were playing off of that, and at the same time they were also playing off of America's obsession with spirituality at the time, sort of around the time of Houdini, where people were obsessed with going to seances and believing in reincarnation. So it has that reincarnation theme also at the same time playing off the whole Egyptian revival. Very cool movie. Carl Freund directed it, and he had worked on Dracula as the cinematographer, and he really, the shadows and the styles and the cinematography are great. Whereas Dracula plays more like a stage play, this one plays a little bit more like a film, and it has some wonderful, wonderful, terrifying scenes in it. Side story about that. When I was younger growing up, I used to watch Creature Double Feature on WLVI TV 56 on Saturday afternoons. If my dad and mom weren't forcing me to go outside, I was glued to that television set watching that. And one day this guy moves in over the hill, this other kid. I'm not going to use his real name. Let's just call him Derek Herman. And he's out looking for a friend, and my dad says, I got a kid your age. He's in the house inside watching TV. Why don't you go in there and see if you can get his ass to come outside and play? All he likes to do is sit there and watch horror movies all day long. He's going to grow up to be some sort of loser. He'll probably be sitting in his basement recording videos and talking to people about large collections of toys and comic books. So go on there and get his ass outside. Get him out to play. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there. I think I was possessed by the spirit of my dad harassing me. Oh, if he could see me now, how disappointed he would be. But anyway, back to Derek Herman and our first meeting together. So Derek comes to my house and knocks on the door and comes inside, and I'm like, I'm watching Creature Double Feature. You want to hang out and watch it with me? So he sits down, and we're watching The Mummy. The Mummy's on. And the part where he comes in on is the part where Karloff has just been caught, and they're showing what happened to him, and he's buried alive. And it's a terrifying scene, and Karloff acts the hell out of it as well. and they're wrapping him up in the bandages, and the terror in his eyes as he realizes what's happening to him. And the last thing you see is Karloff's terrified eyes before they drop the sarcophagus lid on top of him. And then they take him away to be buried, and all the slaves that bury him are executed by having spears thrown through them. And it's pretty graphic for the time, and it's a pretty terrifying scene. So he sees this. I don't know if he watched the whole movie or stopped at that point and went out and played. Regardless, the next day we run into each other, and he tells me, he's like, I had horrible nightmares last night because of that movie you showed me. Cut to 20 years later, we reconnect on Facebook, and the first thing he brings up is he's like, I remember that the first time I met you, you made me watch The Mummy on TV, and I was terrified. And he goes, still to this day, I can remember that movie, and I'm terrified by it. And he goes, I can't remember some of the stuff I did yesterday, but I remember that. And it just goes to show you the power of these films and the impression they can leave on you. Even at our age, when these films were considered old, when we were kids, they were terrifying. In fact, and nowadays, even watching it as an adult, it really is powerful, some of the scenes in those movies, and really well done. And of course, these custom pieces came with packaging. We've got the one for the Mummy, the Type 3 Toys presents Boris Karloff, the Mummy, 8-inch custom action figure. And it's got the Scroll of Thoth. Herein are set down the magic words by which Isis raised Osiris from the dead. O Amun-Ra, O gods, gods, death is but the doorway to new life. We live today. We shall live again. In many forms we shall return, O mighty one. That was, I think it was a Boris Karloff imitation. It was sort of Stewie from Family Guy combined with Dr. Shrinker with a sprinkling, a smattering of Bobby Boris Pickett to give you a taste of Boris Karloff. And we've got Boris Karloff as the Mummy, featuring real fabric bandages. And then you've got some stills from the film there. Very cool. I hope I didn't resurrect a mummy by reading that Scroll of Thoth. Next up, we have REMCO's version of the Mummy. Now, surprisingly enough, out of the vintage toys when they did the Mummy figure, none of them were based on the Karloff Mummy. Most of them were based on the Lon Chaney Jr. version of the Mummy from the latter films in the series. So this is one of the only vintage toys that is based on Karloff's version of the Mummy. As you can see right there, it's got that great REMCO card out. And this is a cool piece that I scored. It is a boxed version. It comes complete in the box. And those of you that have seen some of my earlier episodes, you know how much I enjoy the REMCO line, especially the songs associated with the figures. REMCO Frankenstein, of course, which was, REMCO Frankenstein, REMCO Frankenstein, REMCO Frankenstein, REMCO. You guys have heard it, you know it. I'm not doing it justice the way I'm singing it here, but you know that song. Well, there's also a REMCO Mummy song, and it went a little something like this. REMCO, REMCO, REMCO. It's the Mummy from REMCO. It's based on Boris Karloff's Frankenstein. Its crushing action isn't a hug. It will kill a guy. REMCO. So let's take a quick look at the box, which is fantastic. It's in really good condition. And again, it's got that great artwork of Karloff, this painted artwork. You know, REMCO, official Universal Studios, The Mummy. And there he is. It doesn't quite look like Karloff. They didn't get the sculpt that right as much as they did with the Frankenstein one. I think the Frankenstein definitely looks like Karloff for the REMCO version. But they're definitely telling you that they're going for the Karloff mummy with this, with the card art. And of course, it's got, as everyone knows, that patina I so enjoy on these pieces. A Toys R Us price tag. Back in the day, you would get this for $6.87, which is kind of expensive for a toy back then, I think. Not now. Of course, I didn't pay anywhere near $6.87 for this. The Mummy. And then you've got the back card art with it. There we go, with Frankenstein. The Mummy. Oh, is that the Mummy? That's the Mummy glowing in the dark. I apologize. Your proof of purchase. Now this one, let's see, it says, his arms spread wide, ready to use the monster crush. The Mummy stalks the graveyard. The Mummy's hands and face glow in the dark as he prowls the night. In spite of his restricting bandages, the Mummy can bend in almost any position. That would apply to me as well. In spite of my restricting bandages, I can bend in almost any position. Using monster crush action, the Mummy locks his arms to hang on. And there, of course, is some kids playing with it. And you've got the Monsterizer, a grail piece that I would like to acquire someday. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have a Sanctum second here this evening. We are going to open this mummy up and take him out of the box, just like Tutankhamun and Imhotep was dragged out of their tombs.
Sanctum second.
So here he is, unboxed. Now inside, this is cool because it still has the iron-on patch, which came with it. Very cool looking mummy there. That's the one that they did where the mummy sort of is half wrapped. I never really liked this style mummy that much when they would do that. I always liked it when they would just have the mummy either with the sort of clay of the earth all over his face or completely wrapped in bandages. This is sort of along the lines of like a Hammer mummy, like from the Mummy's Shroud, where the eyes would open up and you sort of saw bandages across the face, but the face was poking through the bandages. But still cool, really cool piece to have this this piece, you know, of the mummy. And I think it says, what does it say there? Oh, why can't we get it in focus? 1979, Universal Studios. Very cool. And here he is, the mummy. You can see the look there. It does kind of look like Karloff now that I look at it. It really looks like they repurposed the Frankenstein head in a way, to be honest with you. They gave it kind of a bowl cut there. You can still see like a hairdo there. Cool eyes, just sort of these two black eyes. And let's see if we can get the Monster Crush action to work. Hold on a second here. Okay, I've got the arms up, and will the Monster Crush action work? De nada. Nothing from the Monster Crush action, but he's in pretty good shape. His arms and legs are pretty tight. The clothing's pretty cool. Came with the instructions as well. Very cool. And the instructions are in great shape. Usually these things are really bad. I'm not going to read the whole instructions for you, but you get and it also comes with this. They all came with these little glow-in-the-dark rings, these sort of death pirate rings. Very cool. Cool piece. That is the Mummy from REMCO. Next up, we have another vintage piece. It is the Mego Mad Monsters Mummy. Now, here's another one like I was discussing before, where they have a mummy with bandages sort of around his face, but the face is poking out. They did this a lot. As you can see from the Famous Monsters picture there, of Lon Chaney Jr. as the mummy's ghost. The Jack Pierce makeup at that time was sort of this plaster of the earth around his face with the closed eye and then the bandages around the body. And the mummy from Karloff's thing was the same way. You saw the full face, but it was the clay of the earth over his face. His face wasn't covered in the bandages, the rest of his body was. Later adaptations of the mummy either do the mummy fully wrapped from head to toe in bandage, or they would have the head wrapped. And that always made me feel like it was like some guy that sort of had a head wound or a concussion or something. But that being said, I really dig this Mad Monsters mummy. It's very cool. This is a T1. It's got the metal joints you can see there. And it's a very cool piece. I like the bandaging they did and the coloring they give it. And the reason I like it is because they give him this really cool, terrifying face. And the glow-in-the-dark eyes especially work on the mummy. They give him no pupils, which is, just makes him look like this dead corpse, of course. And then he's got the bandages around, his face is poking out. But so this is one of the few ones that I like where they do have the bandaged mummy with the face poking out. And he's got the glow hands, of course. So he had glow hands, glow eyes, and cool bandages. Now, that's a vintage piece, and there's something rattling around in that guy. So I don't know if his joints are about to come loose or what. But he's a cool piece of my collection. I really dig him. And I have a box for him as well, but it is a repro box, but it'll give you some idea of what the box looks like when you got it. It's The Horrible Mummy is what they called him. I love that font. Very cool. And you've got eyes and hands glow in the dark, official world's greatest superheroes. The Horrible Mummy. And, of course, you've got this cool picture of the mummy on the back. And I really dig that picture. That's cool. Look at that. Coming at you. Now there they give him pupils, which is kind of interesting. Not recommended for children over 3 years old. Very cool. Now, sticking with the Mego theme, here we are with a modern Mego. Mego has had a resurgence in the last couple of years or so, reintroducing modern figures in their Mego style. And they have a monster line, and they have gone with sort of generic type monsters the same way they do with the Mad Monsters. And this is their mummy, which I had to get because, as I said, I really do love getting mummy figures. This one's kind of cool. It goes with the sort of head-to-toe version of the mummy, but they sort of just have his eyes peering out, and then he's like gritting his teeth. I mean, there must have been a great mummification process that the teeth would have survived, but it gives him a creepy look, and I kind of dig it, especially those pinhole eyes there. It reminds me a lot of the mummy from The Mummy's Shroud, the Hammer Pictures film, which, Hammer did a series of mummy films as well. Each one, with diminishing returns, just as the Universal Pictures were, in that the quality got less, and you never know how you would enjoy them as well. But one of the scenes from The Mummy's Shroud that was always cool was the way the mummy opened his eyes. It was kind of always scared me. They wrapped him really well in bandages. And again, he's got this, I don't know what this is supposed to be, but if I were to guess, mummies' organs were placed inside chalices and vases inside the tomb. So perhaps that's the mummy's hearts or organs that he's carrying around. But my guess is this is probably something to resurrect him, or it's a nice dish of tana leaves, so he can make some tana leaf tea. But it's a modern piece, I know, but it is Mego, and it's part of my mummy collection, and I really dig it. One more custom piece, and then we're going to go straight back to vintage. But I had to share this because it's too cool not to share. This is a piece I acquired a few years back from a fellow collector. I don't know who made this. I'm sorry. If anybody is aware of who the maker is of it, by all means, please drop a line in the comments and let us know so that I can give them appropriate credit. But it was listed as a Lon Chaney Jr. mummy, but to me it appears more to be like the Tom Tyler mummy from The Mummy's Hand. Now, the Mummy's Hand was the long-awaited sequel to The Mummy. They didn't start making mummy movies again until the 40s. But boy, they made a lot of them. They made a total of 7 mummy films, from The Mummy straight up to Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. And Tom Tyler was the first one to star in it, and it takes place in Egypt. And the thing they did about him that was really cool was after they filmed him, they blacked out his eyes so that he had these black eyes, and it really gave them this sort of eerie look. And the mummy at that time is not Imhotep, it's Karis, and he is always resurrected by some of the ancient priests who are still alive today. As a matter of fact, the tone of the Mummy films later on take on a very Lovecraftian feeling. You have these ancient priests that are sort of still alive, resurrecting this mummy to do their bidding, to help them reincarnate the princesses, or, kill violators of the ancient tomb. They're holding this sort of religion before Christianity type thing. It's very cool, sort of the old ones type thing. Anyhow, this is a custom piece. It's done great. It's got the mummy in the sling, and it's got that really cool sculpt. It does have eyes, and then it's got that style there with blood coming out of his mouth and blood coming out of his eye. And look at that hand just reaching to crush whoever the priest commands, or whoever has violated our tomb. Here is some vintage AHI goodness. Now, as y'all know, I'm a big fan of the AHI monsters, as a lot of monster kids are, especially if you grew up in the 70s. I never had these in the 70s, but have acquired them later in life. And when the monster craze started up again in the 60s and 70s, of course they brought back Frankenstein and Dracula and the Wolfman and the Mummy. The Mummy they went for, like I stated earlier, was the Lon Chaney Jr. version of the Mummy from the latter films. But what they added to it, as you can see here from these figures alone, is the picture over there on the Famous Monsters magazine. You've got the mummy with the closed eye. But everything from the Aurora kits to puzzles to other action figures of the mummy would do this look of him. And obviously it's because they based these off the Aurora kits, isn't it? That the AHIs are based off the Aurora kit. With the mummy has this little bit of blood coming from his eye. And it was the same thing with like the Maniac iron-ons, the iron-on shirts. The mummy would, suddenly the mummy was very bloody. He had blood all over his bandages, blood dripping from his eye. And there was never really any explanation. Is the mummy bleeding? Did somebody think when they made these things, well, he's wrapped in bandages, he must be some sort of, maybe he's injured and he's bleeding, so we'll put some blood seepage there. Or is it along the lines of that the mummy has killed one of his victims, and that's the blood of his victims all over his bandages, which is kind of creepy. He's crushed somebody's skull and the blood just caught him right in the eye or all over his bandages. And finally, we have 2 more vintage pieces here, also AHI, and these are AHI, what they call jigglers. They were made of sort of this softish rubber, and they would come on these little elastic bands, and you would hang them from the rear view mirror of your car or your doorknob or your bedpost when you were a kid. And you could pick them up fairly cheap at Woolworths and various places. This is a smaller one. It's turning color because the petroleum in the rubber starts to degrade over time, but he's still in very good condition. And he's got the bloody hand and the bloody... I always love it when they have his arm in a sling like that, but he looks very, very much like the Lon Chaney Jr. And at this point in time, him and Lon Chaney Jr. probably smell about the same. Bloody mouth, bloody eye, Very cool piece. These came out in the early 70s. I really dig them. Yeah, 73 right there. Universal City Studios. And you can see, it's sort of degrading, but I love it. And this is a carded one over here. This is a reproduction card, but you can see what it might be like in the store. A larger figure, and this one's in great condition. Really cool piece. I mean, for such, bargain pieces, they really did give it a lot of detail. The guys that designed these must have put a lot of, and I love it here. You can see you got Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, and then you've got the creature behind his leg there. You can't clearly see it. I don't want to mess around, but these are creepy and gruesome, much like myself. World famous super monsters. So once again, thanks for joining us here in the Sanctum. I appreciate you all taking the time to sit here and go through this stuff with me. Until next time, brew yourself a nice warm cup of Tana leaf tea, wrap yourself in Egyptian cotton, and what's that outside the door? Shuffling. Coming towards me. Oh dear God. No! No!